Hi, I'm Mark with Skid Pro. Today I'm going to show you on our Gen 1 and Gen 2 soil conditioner how to replace the motor if it needs to be. First thing we're going to start with is removing this guard here, and it's the same between both Gen 1 and Gen 2. Now we need to remove the hose clamp. Now that we removed the guard and the two hose clamps, we're ready to remove these hoses. So we're going to start over here with the swivel joints, and we're going to take the top one loose and then the bottom one, so that we got that separated. One thing I like to do before I take the hoses off is I like to mark one of them and on the motor up to the fittings and the hose, so I know how they go back together. First thing I do is I crack both lines. I'm going to put this underneath there so I got just something to collect the oil so it doesn't make a big mess. Once we broke the lines loose from the block, we're going to basically set them over here, and if you have a pail or a pan or something to let some of the oil go in, that would be helpful. So now we got the hoses loose from the block, we're going to remove the fittings that are going into the motor so that we can have the hoses completely clear. First thing I do is get the outside one loose, and then I'm going to spin it out before I remove the other one. Put it right in the pail. Bend the other side down into the pail. And this gives me a place to keep my hoses. Now I'll crack the back one loose, and I'll repeat the same process. And we'll move this out of the way. The other thing I like to do is cover these up so I don't get any dirt or dust in there. So you're going to want to cover up the parts with a rag, just like that. Now we're ready to remove the drum. So we're going to have to loosen up a couple things, and we'll go through that process now. What you're going to want to do, we're going to need to get in here and basically loosen these hub up. And to do that, we got to get lined up. We have access holes up here to line up with the bolt holes. And you can just rotate this a little bit to line up that bolt with this hole. Now we can also access some of them through the side, which I'll show you. But what we're going to do right now is do as many as we can. But I start with the one lined up with this hole first. Now that we're ready to loosen up the bolts on the motor mounting plate, since they're Loctited with permanent Loctite, we're going to use a torch here to warm them up a little bit to release that Loctite so we can get the bolts loose. So what we're going to do, we're going to loosen up the 6 bolts in there, and we're going to rotate it as we go. So we warm each one up with the torch, break it loose. Repeat that process 6 times and get them all cracked loose. I don't take any out, I just break them loose. And to rotate this, once we have this off, we can either get in here with a pry bar, or we use basically a strap wrench that looks like this. Yeah, and the strap wrench we put around there, so then we can rotate that. So now that we got them all cracked loose, we're going to get ready to remove them and be ready to take that off. One of the reasons we break them all loose is now we can come in here and we can sneak in along the sides in the bottom to get to some of the bolts. We don't have to be all in one spot. We can still rotate it and do every one out of here if we want to. But if you have a ball end like this, you can come in from the sides and get a lot of them. Now that we got the 6 bolts loosened and removed over there, now we're going to come over to the other side here, and we need to loosen up the set screws here. We're going to put a little heat to it. Just be careful not to get a bunch on the O-ring seal there. We're just going to warm it up a little bit so that we can get the Loctite to release. So inside the shop we have a stand that we can put things on, but if you were doing this at home, you would basically have this down on the floor. Same concept applies. We just put a jack underneath here to hold up the drum. Now we're going to remove the bolts, the 3/4 inch socket here. Now we're going to remove the bolts on the motor here. And normally you'll see me, I break the nut loose first. Okay, now we got all the bolts loose. The nuts are off. We're going to slide this back as far as we can. So you can see what I did there is I let it drop down a little bit on the one side and then kicked it over. Now we're going to move this over so we can get to just the motor. Now you can see we just are to basically the plate here, and we're going to need to remove this key and take this nut off so that we can remove the front plate. Now I'm going to remove this key so I can get to the nut. So what I'm going to do is get a hand here, and we're going to tap this back out. We have a brass hammer to do this, or you would want to leave the nut back on, which I'm going to spin it back on partly so that we don't damage the threads when we're hitting over here. You might have to tap it a little bit, but it's loose, just go easy. Now that we got that tap loose, the nut off, I'm going to hold this plate and we're going to slide this out. Now we successfully have removed the motor and can now replace that motor and reassemble. Now we're going to put the motor back in and show you how to get it all back together. So first thing we're going to do is get the motor up in here. I like to put there's a couple bolts in temporarily. Just to hold that motor. I'll make sure to cover that back up so that the ports still can't get dirt or dust in them. Come over here, make sure the keyway is in all the way. And then you're going to line this plate up with that key. So I checked to make sure that key isn't leaning or cocked. It's straight right now. I got a little bit of thread showing. So now I can just use my nut. And then I just get it on a little further until I can put the washer on. So we're going to tighten this up until it's tight, and then we got to basically make it line up with the hole there. I put a little mark on that just so we can see where we're supposed to be, and now we can go in and get the key back inside. And we're going to bend our tabs down like that. Once that's back on and tight, I'm going to remove my nuts holding these bolts in so I can slide this all the way back again. And then we're ready to put the shaft back up in. Okay, right now we're gonna get ready we got the motor all back in, shifted over. It's time to put the drum back in. So we're gonna work the drum back in. You're gonna watch me kind of do it. We have a cart. If you're doing this on the floor, you would basically kind of have to lift up or in the machine and get this in place and then come back down around it. We have a little better scenario to do it, so I'll show you how we do it. First thing I'm gonna do is get this bearing over here lined up. Get a couple bolts started in there. You can see it's pretty easy to maneuver around. I'm going to crank it up just a few more inches. I'm going to check the bolts out, make sure that they look good, not damaged, no dirt or anything on them. And they all look good. They just have a little bit of Loctite on them from before. I'm going to put a touch of Loctite back on these. So when we put them back in, one thing you want to do is make sure your greaser is facing up. And it looks like we could use a little more go up, but I'm just going to lift it up a little bit to get this first one started. Once we tighten this bearing back up, it's important to make sure that we take these set screws out and re-Loctite them in. So just pull them out, put some Loctite on there, and then back in. I'm going to put a little Loctite on all these bolts. We're going to go one by one back in. I've gone around and snugged all these up. Now I'm going to get ready to tighten them all up. So I'm going to do one by one, going all the way around and hitting here. Now that we've gone around and tightened up all 6 of them, we basically go around in a circle, follow each one, start them with them snug. We're going to get now ready to put the hoses back on so that we can put everything back together. This is the hose that we marked, so we're going to line it back up with the mark that we got on the motor so that we know the hose is going back in the same spot that we took it from. Going to come back here, run the hose back through here on this side, and then thread this in by hand to start with. Gonna make sure this hose is laying in there right, nice and even, and then tighten this bottom one up. Now I'm gonna repeat the same process for the other hose. Make sure that hose is laying and not twisted funny. So it's looking good. So then we're going to hold this position steady right here. On this side, stays right where it's at. The swivel part on the back, we're going to tighten up. Now we're going to get our hose clamp started back on. I like this to start it by hand so I know it ain't cross-threaded. Now we're just going to tighten these up. Just snug them down. And now we're ready to put the guard back on. Same thing here, let's start the bolts ahead of time. On these, it's good to put a little Loctite. Just snug them back up. And now we're ready to use the attachment again.